I think that's it for the logistics. So today's webinar is titled Getting Ready for Beech Leaf Disease, because as we'll learn and we'll talk about more, it's really just a matter of time, not if, but when beech leaf disease and beech bark disease impacts our beech here in Vermont. So I'm really pleased to introduce our presenters. We have Savannah Ferreira and Andrew Hirsch with Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. They are part of the forest health team here in Vermont and are not only presenters today, but also just great resources for folks who are interested in learning more about health issues in our forests. Savannah and Andrew, I'm sure you can share more about your role within the forest health team at Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. And so with that, I will go ahead and just turn things over to you both to introduce yourselves further. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having us. So again, I'm Savannah Ferreira. I use she, her pronouns. I work out of the Forest Biology Lab in Randolph, but I work statewide.
And I'm Andrew Hirsch. I'm the protection forester down in Windham and Windsor counties.
So today, Andrew and I are going to be talking about American beech, specifically beech bark disease and beech leaf disease. So I want to start this presentation with a reminder of American beech's importance. This is a native tree. It's one of the most numerous tree species that we have in our state. It's part of many different forest types, predominantly the maple, beech, birch forest type, and that's actually comprises 71% of forest land in Vermont. And that forest type specifically is responsible for 73% of Vermont's forest carbon. So American beech has a history of cultural, economic, and ecological values, which has helped support the environment, wildlife, and humans for generations. So what's at stake if we lose American beech? Well, though American beech is not really economically important for us in Vermont, it's typically a low value, maybe hardwood pulp species. Beech was actually used for flooring, furniture, and veneer plywood in other parts of the United States. Additionally, American beech is especially favored as fuel wood because it has this high density and really good burning qualities. American beech also provides, really importantly, several non-market values, which is your wildlife habitat, your ecosystem services, and recreation. Vermont tourism and recreation is one of the largest industries that we have in the state. We see about 13 million visitors each year. And again, not all tourism in Vermont is actually centralized around American beech. If we lose one of these keystone species in the maple, beech, birch forest type, this could have rippling effects on all of our local ecosystems. So at the small scale, if we lost beech, we have impacts on mycorrhizal fungi that are beech-only obligates, as well as aphids, mites, and defoliators. These organisms are consumed by small mammals and birds, which has a crippling effect on local food webs. At the larger scale, beech nuts are consumed by black bears, martins, fisher, deer, turkey, ruffed grouse, and blue jays. Although many large vertebrates are not typically exclusive to American beech, like some of our obligate mycorrhizal and insects are, if they lose a large part of their diet, as well as face the effects of a crippling food web from losing those other obligate species, this could have significant consequences.
So now you guys hopefully have a little more appreciation for beech in Vermont, and we can switch gears and talk a little bit about a well-established complex in Vermont, beech bark disease. So a little background on beech bark disease. You might be thinking, why are we even talking about beech bark disease? I thought this was about beech leaf disease. We thought it was important just to mention because this disease really makes our beech trees much more vulnerable to a disease such as beech leaf disease. And you'll figure out why I put quotations around that probably when Savannah talks more about beech leaf disease. But yeah, so that's kind of why we wanted to bring it up. A little bit about the origin. So it's two parts. There's a non-native invasive scale, beech scale, that's from Europe, and then a native, supposedly native to the Northeast, Nectria fungus. So the scale insect is unintentionally transported to Nova Scotia around 1890 and was found to be widespread in the Vermont's Green Mountain National Forest by around 1955. So the causal agents, again, the beech scale, Cryptococcus fagusuga, and 2 Nectria fungus of the Neonectria faginata and Neonectria ditissima. So basically the scale feeding is what creates that wound for fungal entry. That's kind of the start of beech bark disease. Spread, both the scale and the scale and the Nectria fungus spread via wind, rain, wildlife, and humans. And the hosts are American and European beech. And then I just included the photo on the right. You know, it's a good visual, shows a healthy beech stem on the left. On the top right, you see the beech scale or the woolly secretions that the scale secretes. And then the bottom right photo is just showing the fruiting bodies of the Nectria fungus that you'd see in the fall. Next slide, please. Starting with beech scale, this is really where beech bark disease starts off. Just a little bit about the scale itself. It's a soft-bodied yellow insect. You can see in that bottom photo, it has parthenogenic reproduction, so there's no male scales, and it's just it doesn't require male and female gamete. Now I'm losing my train of thought here. Basically, it doesn't require the infusion of male and female gametes.
We figured that out.
So it's elliptical shaped at maturity with a maximum size of 0.5 to 1 millimeter long. And that woolly wax is really the most obvious sign that you'll see of the beech scale being present. That's probably what most of you see if you get out and have seen something like that on the bark of beeches. They have piercing, sucking mouth parts, and that's really what introduces that wound to the tree. So if several scales are feeding near each other on the stem, they'll basically shrink the cells in the cambium and create that fissure where the fungal pathogen can then enter and really kick off the disease. Next slide. Moving on to the Neonectria fungus. So again, that pathogen establishes within those fissures that are created by the beech scale, and then they form those cankers within the vascular tissue, which eventually girdles the tree over time, preventing nutrients from traveling through the trunk and branches. And as that develops, the tree becomes more and more stressed and therefore more vulnerable to other factors, including drought, diseases, insects, and even high winds, where we get like beech snap and things like that. And just some more photos on the right, you see the red parathecia, or those fruiting bodies produced by the Neonectria fungus. And then on the right photo is a heavily infected beech tree with some pretty significant cankers on it. So just some more photos I wanted to include, just some different kind of forms you can see beech bark disease in, you could say. That top left photo is just showing fissures or cankers in the bark, which is really kind of a textbook beech that you probably see around the state of Vermont. Probably many of you have seen that. The top right photo is the white woolly wax from the beech scale, and also those tar spots that are formed by that Neonectria fungus. And then below that, basically, if you were to scrape away where those tar spots were, you'd see that fungal infection beneath the bark, and that's kind of just the necrotic tissue where the fungus is forming. And then again, another Neonectria fruiting body photo. And you'd see that in the fall. And then the far right photo where I mentioned beech snap, that's just a good example of that. And just a little fact of mortality and beech snap levels can be as high as 50% in 5 years. So while maybe the tree itself won't die, even heavy winds or a storm event can snap the tree in half and kill it that way. And the killing front begins 1 to 19 years after the arrival of beech scale, and that's a pretty wide time frame, you might be thinking, but it really is based on a number of factors. If you have other environmental factors that are going against the tree, it can die sooner, such as other diseases, insects, high winds like beech snap or beech leaf disease, which is one of the things we're concerned about with the presence of beech leaf disease. Here is just some maps of previous year aerial surveys that we've done, just highlighting the beech bark disease that we've seen. So in 2022, our aerial surveying showed that there was around 31,000 acres of premature yellowing and dieback attributed to beech bark disease. And that was attributed to the persistent drought period we had at that time, which basically exacerbated the beech bark disease symptoms. And then last year we mapped significantly less damage, so only around like 2,000 acres. And since we had a wet spring and summer last year, we're anticipating similar numbers or lower numbers again this year.
Now that you know more about one of the main stressors to our beech trees, we can switch gears and talk about the newly established invasive that we have in Vermont, which is beech leaf disease. So beech leaf disease is a novel disease affecting all species of beech in North America. This includes your American, European, Oriental, and Chinese beech. This disease was first detected in Ohio in 2012 and was unfortunately detected in Vermont last year. Beech leaf disease is not a disease, and I hope that's one of the main takeaways you take away from this presentation today. I know that the common name is beech leaf disease, but it's actually a nematode, and here's a photo of what that nematode looks like. It's a subspecies of a leaf gall nematode, so it's Lydiolynchus crenate messini. Nematode infection mechanisms are not fully understood yet, but there's new research indicating that this nematode is present and associated with the buds and leaves of all beeches, so all age classes and sizes. Since this is a relatively new pest, the spread is not yet known. It's possible it could be spread by birds feeding on infested beech buds, by humans transporting infected plant material, and then also along clone clusters of an interlocking root graph, or maybe even by wind in a west-east wind transmission. So definitely don't know the vector, and it can make it really hard to control. So before moving on to what beech leaf disease looks like in the field, I just want to go over what a nematode is, because not a lot of us have been familiar with this pest before. So this is an organism in the phylum Nematoda, which is actually in the animal kingdom. It's commonly referred to as a microscopic worm, but there's some that can be as large as 3 feet long. They're one of the most abundant organisms on Earth, and they're mostly observed as free-living organisms. However, they can be parasitic to both animals and plants. What we're focusing on today is a microscopic plant parasitic nematode. And plant parasitic nematodes can cause physical damage from feeding. Sometimes they're able to inject enzymes that kill or alter the cells of their host plants. They're also potentially can transmit bacteria and viruses, and then they can be a wound, so a point of entry for other insects and diseases to become established. There's very few diseases that are caused by foliar nematodes, but if you're inspired by this presentation and you want to know more about nematodes, I would suggest taking a deep dive into some root parasitic nematodes. Regardless, since these nematodes are so small, when we're talking about infestations of nematodes, we're not talking about 1 or 2 per tree. We're talking about thousands or tens of thousands of nematodes in a tree. So when we're in the field, we're not looking to ID or even find those nematodes, right? These are microscopic. We're looking for the damage that they're causing to the beech that they're infesting. So in early stages of infestations, beech leaves are going to begin to develop a striping pattern in between leaf veins, as shown in these pictures here. These symptoms are visible immediately upon bud break in the spring, and they actually don't progress in severity throughout the growing season. In early infestations, affected leaves may be unevenly distributed in the lower to mid canopy, but the best way to view them is actually viewing from below, looking up into the sky. When you have a gray sky, it is much harder to see. So look on these sunny, bright days. So probably not this week, but we'll have some warmer weather soon. Severe symptoms often lead to chlorotic banding later in the growing season, as well as premature leaf drop. Now, leaves with light, medium, or heavy symptoms of infestation, as well as asymptomatic leaves, can actually all occur not only on the same tree, but even on the same branch of an individual tree. So it's thought that this nematode overwinters inside of the bud, so they're causing this damage before bud break in the spring. And because they're in the buds before bud break, sometimes you can have aborted buds, which are just crispy, empty buds on the end of an affected branch. You might have 2 or 3 per branch is what I've been seeing this summer, where it's as soon as you touch the bud, it just kind of disintegrates. There was never any leaf tissue in there. So if we zoom in and we look at some of the infested buds, we can look at some things happening on the cellular level. So if we start with this photo here on the left, which is 0 through 4, this researcher is just comparing a non-infested bud, which is 0, with different or varying levels of infestation, which is 1 through 4. So 4 has the most severe or significant damage. I didn't want to clutter those slide with numbers, but you can just tell that these look different. They're smaller, they vary in color, and they're kind of distorted. If we look and shift to this set of 6 photos here, the top 3 are showing non-infested, or AKA healthy scales. And notice that these are flat. You see some really clear distinction. They look organized. These are normal cells. If we compare that to what we're seeing on the bottom, these are beech leaf disease infested bud scales. So they're disorganized. We lost those clear lines we had above. The cells are irregularly sized and shaped. So things are just kind of getting gross. So this is a leaf gall nematode, right? So it's distorting by feeding, it's injecting these enzymes, which is causing this disorganization, which is why you can see some of these bandings and darker or thicker tissue forming on the leaves. So if we look on the leaves, similar thing is happening. So starting with the photo to the left, the top shows infested leaves, the bottom is non-infested. Notice that you have veins that are larger and thicker. However, there are fewer smaller veins when beech leaf disease is present. So you were missing all of these little internal veins. If we look at the photo to the right, the left 3 are non-infested leaves, showing what the internal structuring cross-section should look like in a healthy or asymptomatic leaf. Everything's nice and organized. The leaf is relatively flat. Again, when we compare that to a beech leaf disease infested leaf, you can see that we have, again, no clear lines. It's really disorganized. The cells are different shapes and sizes. So that's what's creating these galls. There are a few things that look similar to beech leaf disease symptoms. A very common one is urinium mite patches. We do see a lot of anthracnose, and with this wet spring that we're experiencing right now, I anticipate to see a lot more anthracnose going into the growing season. Aphid feeding can sometimes cause this rolled margin that you see here. And then abiotic stuff like herbicide injury can cause this chlorotic banding and also some leaf deformation. If you're unsure if you have beech leaf disease or one of these lookalikes, just take a picture or a sample and report it. We'd much rather always get an early detection report than risk missing something. And I'm always happy to know what the aphids and mites look like on our landscape. So I wanted to come back to the first distribution map that we knew of beech leaf disease. So this was in 2019. Again, it started in Ohio in 2012, and where my cursor is that light yellow. And it really stayed to right around Ohio in the 7 years that we knew of its existence. But we did have one pop-up infestation in Southern Connecticut, Southern New York in 2019. We're not sure at this time if this was a secondary introduction of beech leaf disease into the United States, or if we just missed a lot of detections through Pennsylvania and New York. But researchers at the Forest Service are actually comparing DNA from this infestation and the original infestation to see if they're genetically similar, if they come from the same evolutionary track, or if they're separate introductions. So if we fast forward to 2020, you can see that we added Massachusetts to the map. Rhode Island as well. We started filling in Pennsylvania and New York a little bit better. In 2021, Maine was added to the map. This again might have been a third introduction since there was no detections made between this first detection and then New Hampshire and Southern Maine. Also in 2021, many states, including Vermont, which I'll show pictures of later, started setting up monitoring plots to track the spread and mortality of beech leaf disease, which could have been contributing to finding or filling in some of these gaps between detections. In 2022, we added more states to the map. So 12 states in Ontario, Canada. New Hampshire for us, New England was the most significant for us. And now 2023, this is the most recent distribution map we have in North America. Again, now we have 15 states in Ontario, Canada, and we included Maryland, West Virginia, and Vermont. And I apologize for not making this sub map here. This is the range of American beech in the United States. So we're not fully across the range of American beech in the United States, but unfortunately, the eastern swath we are, since it's already getting into Michigan. So in Vermont, we started with 2 detections in Windham County in 2023. That's since grown to include 8 new towns in early 2024. Reports came through public observations using VT invasives and then contacting our forest health team directly. To help track the spread and severity of the infestation, so Vermont and other New England states put in beech leaf disease plots in 2021. And that's what this map here on the right is showing. We also did some additional surveying, which is what the middle and left map is showing, just so we wanted to be able to look at beech leaves that were outside of our monitoring plots to make sure that we weren't missing something. Now, you might notice that our beech leaf disease monitoring locations does not have anything in Windham County, which is exactly where we found beech leaf disease for the first time. And there was no monitoring plots put in there because this was a federal project that had really specific site characteristics that were related to beech stocking, state or federal ownership of land, and then proximity to streams and rivers, because it was thought that that birds might have been the main vector of beech leaf disease. So they wanted to try to tap into some wildlife corridors. So what's being done to control and or eradicate this disease? Well, right now, the main thing being done is research. There's still so much that's not known about this complex that there's a lot of time and resources being devoted to this at the university, state, and federal levels. Some states have suggested using quarantines to try to slow the spread into new counties and states. But again, because we don't know what the vector is, it's really hard to regulate. Some studies are looking into increasing genetic diversity of beech on the landscape, as well as selectively breeding for resistance. Many of you know this already, but beech trees love to sucker. So every new sucker which grows into a tree is going to have those identical genetics to a host tree, which can unfortunately lead to a lot of non-diverse or non-resistant genetics. I do want to mention some pesticide management suggestions that you can find online. And I want to be very clear that I'm not endorsing any of these products in the state of Vermont because they're actually not registered as pesticides and they cannot be used as a pesticide. I wanted to share this information today because of education and that this is still in the research phase, just so you have the most up-to-date information and you're able to make informed decisions based off that. So whenever we talk about pesticides in Vermont, I just, again, want to be clear that the label is the law. So the first one you might find online is a phosphate or a polyphosphate 30. This is actually a potassium fertilizer, and it's usually used as a fungicide. So Ohio researchers have been treating beech infested with beech leaf disease with this fertilizer and has noted a decrease in nematode populations and an increase in health and vigor of their treated trees compared to their non-treated trees. This was an experiment, and all the trees that they treated did not have beech bark disease, which unfortunately most of the trees in Vermont do have. There have been other scientists who have replicated this experiment and they've had considerably differing results. And this is probably due to the fact that it's a fungicide and beech leaf disease is caused by a nematode. So they have different killing mechanisms. Also, it's worth noting that positive results are just likely an increase in overall tree health and vigor because fertilizers help to stimulate the tree's natural defenses. With an increased health and vigor, they're just better able to deal with pests and pathogens. But again, none of the experiments looked at beech bark disease trees. Another pesticide you might find online contains the active ingredient flyolopram. So this is a foliar nematode that also has really varying results in regards to beech leaf disease control. And again, is not a registered pesticide in Vermont. This nematode is effective for other plant parasitic nematodes, but it doesn't kill the egg stage, which is a problem for beech leaf disease specific nematodes because they have a staggered development. So that means that adults, juveniles, and eggs all exist at the same time throughout the year. They just keep having multiple generations, where other nematode species that this would be effective might have 1 or 2 generations per year. So you'd really be able to kill the eggs. So because eggs are still going to exist with this, you're not really doing anything for beech leaf disease. I'll let Andrew talk about management.
Yeah, so what about forest management? Every time I talk to somebody about beech leaf disease, they're always like, okay, so what are we supposed to do, on the landscape scale? And like Savannah said, there's a lot of research still going on as to possible solutions. So really right now, there's two main messages we want to get out is just one is don't rush to cut your beech. Is there possible resistance? You can walk around if you get out enough and see beeches around that look to be resistant to beech bark disease. Are we going to have the same for beech leaf disease? And if we rush to cut our beech, we might be getting rid of some that could be resistant. So that's one of the things. And the other thing you can really do right now is just focus on invasive plant management. So, beech really takes over the understory in some areas, and in those beech, birch, maple forest types, we're likely to see it get replaced by maple and birch. But if there's areas where there's more invasives in the understory, and then we lose that beech component, the next thing that's going to come up is those invasives. They really outcompete our native trees and plants. So that's really something that you could focus on right now is, getting out and taking care of your invasive issues in the understory, especially if they're at a manageable point right now. If you go and take care of that now, it'll really do you a favor in the future. So you don't end up with like, an understory of barberry like you see in that bottom left photo. So that's some of the main things you can focus on now, or, don't rush to cut your beech and focus on your invasive plant management across the landscape.
And with that,
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to remind everybody on how to report a sighting of beech leaf disease. So if you go to vtinvasives.org, you can report all sorts of invasives. We have aquatics, terrestrial plants, as well as our insects and diseases. This would fall under a tree disease, even though it's a nematode. So again, even if you're unsure if you have beech leaf disease, just send in a report. It will ping an email to a lot of us as subject area experts, and we'll be able to follow up on that. And I think we still have time. Andrew and I can take questions.
Great. Thank you guys so much. And boy, I have a lot of questions. We have a few questions that have come in the chat box. Just a reminder. So we have plenty of time, and let's get a conversation going. And if folks have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat box, or folks are welcome to unmute yourselves and turn your camera on if you want to take advantage of Savannah and Andrew's time here and ask questions live. I have a few questions actually. Wondering, going back to the spread, boy, I was really blown away by that map, Savannah, that you shared around, it's sort of, like just sort of the spread, right? I'm curious, is that sort of, if you were to project out, imagine you had a crystal ball. I know you don't, but imagine you had a crystal ball. Like, are we expecting, sort of the rest of that map to fill in over the next couple of years, or, what are we, based on, it looks like annually there's been a pretty significant spread since 2012. Are you expecting the entire region to be covered within the next couple of years, or for it to be showing up across the region? What's the talk around the continual spread?
Yeah, we are anticipating seeing it continue to spread. I do have questions that I don't have the answers to on maybe its heat tolerance. Why is it more prevalent in New England, where beech bark disease is still present in West Virginia and Virginia, maybe not as severe as in New England, but is that the only reason it spread so quickly? Because if we look at the first couple maps, it's not really going south. So are we just not looking for it in the southern regions, or is it just not there, or is something else keeping it at bay? And again, it might just be because we have such severe beech bark disease that might be causing our trees to be more predisposed to getting these infestations. But I'm not too sure.
Lots of interesting questions. Can I ask you a sort of a follow-up question then? So this map is indicating observations. Is it indicating mortality as well, or what are we seeing for tree mortality across the region and the sort of its spread?
Yeah, so we don't have great numbers on this. This is a presence absence map by county. We have a Vermont town level map that we're trying to keep up to date for all of our invasive pests. And if you go to vtinvasives.org and look at beech leaf disease, it'll bring you right to the map. We're trying to do that with all of our invasive pests. In our forest annual conditions report that we publish every year, we're trying to capture what we're going to see as mortality. In places where beech bark disease is not present, they've been reporting mortality over their overstory trees within 5 to 9 years. With it being in New England, we're really keeping an eye on Maine and New Hampshire, who have gotten this infestation before us. They're not reporting large scale mortality, but they're starting to report their understory dieback.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Great. Well, we do have another question again in the chat box, and I encourage folks to take advantage of the opportunity to ask lots of questions. We have a question from Alice regarding whether or not the beech leaf disease also impacts or affects European beeches. So we're talking like Fagus sylvatica, I believe that's how you pronounce it, which are like the purple beeches or the copper beeches. Do you guys know, are those species impacted as well?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is going to affect all species of beech. So this even is Oriental and Chinese beech as well. So European, American, Oriental, and Chinese.
Okay. So planted beeches, so like beeches in the urban environment, planted beeches are impacted as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Well, and another question from Linda, just a reminder about, so folks are curious, you shared VT invasives as a place to report it. What are you looking for in terms of information from landowners or professionals in terms of sharing potential sightings? Are you, what should folks, I guess like, yeah, the site, can you just kind of walk through like, what are those sort of signs that you're looking for? And then are you expecting, like, are you receiving samples, I guess, or just photos, or what are you looking for folks in terms of submitting potential reports?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you go onto vtinvasives.org and you hit record it, you'll be asked a series of questions, which is your contact information, whether or not we can reach out to you, if you wanted to provide your phone number or email. It requires a photo, so you need to be able to send in a photo, and then also it requires location information. So if we just get that and say you're hiking and this isn't your property and you see it, we'll still be able to follow up on that report without needing to contact you or set up a visit. If this is on your own property and you have questions, you think you might have it, you can reach out to Andrew or myself directly. You can also submit a report and just ask that you do want to have follow-up, and then we can come and see your property and talk about beech leaf disease. We're looking for all these different types of symptoms. So this dark interveinal striping, again, this is easiest to see from the bottom of the canopy up. I know this isn't great in a webinar, but here's some of the severe infestations that I got from Vernon of last year. And this is actually the top of the leaf. So when you get really nasty infestations, you can actually see it without looking up into the canopy. But if you're just seeing some dieback, those crispy buds, and overall mortality, it's definitely things that we want to be able to track and know about.
It looks like, Savannah, that sample you just shared on, the 3D, right? Like the real in-person live sample. It looks like, is that like yellowing in between the veins? Is that pretty common for like sort of a heavier infestation? Is that
a sign? Infestation. So with beech leaf disease, when you get that first flush of leaves, what you see is what you get typically. So you'll see this mild banding, kind of what's shown on the screen here. This yellowing can develop later in the season if it's a heavy infestation. So that's kind of a chlorotic banding that your leaves are missing these nutrients, just because everything's so disorganized in there and the transport of minerals and such aren't very effective.
Very interesting. There is a question from Tom. Given the genetic identity between the suckers and the parent tree, would the juvenile, sort of those younger clusters of young trees be more or less susceptible, didn't come off very well. Would they be more or less susceptible to the nematode, for this disease? Or not this disease, this nematode.
More speculation that it would be more susceptible. We're seeing high mortality in our understory. So our saplings can die within a year. I went back to a site in in Demerston that we confirmed last year, and we're already seeing sapling mortality. And we only knew about that for a year. It was probably present for at least the year before. So maybe we're at the 2-year mark, but our overstory beech in that site is still standing.
So you are seeing more mortality in the saplings in the, sort of sapling seedling age class. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Or that, yeah. Interesting. Well, I as a, as a community, I feel like, while beech obviously has a really important role, I can imagine some consulting foresters are, less upset about seeing some of that mortality, right? Given how prolific beech can be, in areas. But Andrew, I really appreciate your points around, sort of the impact of this on invasive species. For a landowner thinking about, maybe that has sort of a heavy area of beech, especially those sort of suckering kind of clusters. What else should they be sort of thinking about in terms of promoting kind of, further regeneration, or, are there other sort of recommendations or thoughts that you've been, as you've been out working with landowners thinking about this, other management considerations that they should be thinking about? Or
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, definitely the invasives are good to focus on. I mean, if you're already planning to do a harvest soon, like, yeah, it'd be good to promote other species, I would say. But yeah, I would definitely want to go back and, don't rush to cut your beech, especially, your overstory species, just in case they have some of that resistance to beech leaf disease. But really, yeah, I think the invasive plant management is a good takeaway message, because I mean, most of the places I walk around, if you look hard enough, you'll find invasives in the understory in the middle of the woods. And if you open up that stand, even if you're doing forest management, if you open up that stand in general, say you lose your beech seedlings, your invasives will take over pretty quickly if they're there. So that's our take home message.
So the moral of the story is, so another reason, right, for us to be proactively addressing invasives. So great. Can I ask too, one of the things that struck me, Savannah, as you were talking about the signs and symptoms, is that, as I think we've seen sort of in different pests over the years, like I'm thinking of emerald ash borer and, some of the other invasive forest pests that we've been on the lookout for, they seem to kind of show up in different places within the canopy. It struck me as kind of interesting that this one is showing up in the lower part of the canopy. Any theories or thoughts on, first, like, is that true? And then two, sort of any theories on why?
Yeah, so this is true. Again, this is going to be a little bit more speculation. First, that's kind of why researchers thought it was a disease at first. A lot of our foliar diseases start at the bottom of the canopy and they work themselves up, mostly because you have the densest part of your canopy. When you have like an understory present, you have a lot of that dense shade. You trap in a lot of humidity and moisture, which is great for fungal pathogens. There's speculation that's also great for nematodes, just because they could be traveling in and out of stomata, maybe getting picked up on the wind, maybe getting knocked off through rain splash onto other leaves. And when they dry out is when they're not able to move as effectively.
Oh, interesting. So it's really kind of that potential sort of splash that's moving them. And you said there's some research going on by the Forest Service in terms of kind of looking at other vectors. I know, sort of, again, kind of wearing past hats and doing forestry outreach and education here in Vermont, we've always talked about don't move firewood. Is that, sort of thinking about potential strategies and vectors? Has there been any discussion about, I guess I don't know how abundantly beech is used as a firewood, but just wondering, like, is that a potential vector, or or is sort of the thinking that there's something else going on?
Yeah, I never want to encourage people to move firewood, because it's always best to buy local, like buy it where you burn it. I think in other parts of beech's range where firewood is used more prevalently and it's not desiccated by beech bark disease before it gets to that point, that would be a great take-home message. For us, I'm thinking it's more going to be, there's been a lot of research with bird vectors. So you have birds feeding on infested beech buds and then pooping on or refeeding on another beech, pooping out nematodes. And those are somehow getting back into the tree. Research is trying to figure out yes, we know that the birds are moving nematodes, but are they able to move nematodes and those nematodes be viable and get back into the tree? Or are they just moving them? They're not too sure. Also, some sap feeding moths were able to move nematodes from point A to point B. But there's a lot unknown and there's a lot of research going on right now, but it is always best practice to never move firewood.
Yeah, no, that's great. And certainly a good takeaway message for everybody on the webinar today, just the importance of that. But it's interesting to think specifically around other vectors, for this issue. Great. Well, I encourage folks, I feel like I've been sort of monopolizing the Q&A session here, but encourage folks, we have a few more minutes left. If you have any questions, or feel free to put them in the chat box, or go ahead and unmute yourself and turn your camera on. We welcome folks joining us and sharing questions live as well. Here's Linda. Yeah. Hi, Linda.
Hi. I will report on Vermont invasives, but you might be interested. I live a mile over the Massachusetts border in Guilford, and all the leaves on the saplings along a path on my property and the larger trees all seem to have beech leaf disease this year. The first time we've ever seen it. So
Yeah, thank you for letting us know. We were able to confirm Guilford. We'll still take additional reports because I keep track of those, so we know, oh, we're getting like 50 or 60 reports in one area versus we just saw a single sapling somewhere else. But unfortunately, yeah, coming up through Massachusetts and that southeastern part near New Hampshire has been the worst for us in Vermont.
thanks.
That's well, it's not great, Linda. I mean, that's not good news, but interesting that I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, and it's in a very visible spot. The beech saplings are along a path that we walk every year, so it's very noticeable to us this year, and we will monitor them.
So it sounds like, Linda, that's a new sighting for you. So you're familiar with the area and you didn't see the signs and symptoms of the disease last year.
It's definitely new. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, thanks so much for sharing. Are there other folks joining us today who, have, either potentially seen sightings or, it looks like there's a few folks in Massachusetts. I'm wondering if other folks have any experience either seeing beech leaf disease out in the woods or managing for it. I know we have a few consulting foresters on the call today. So if anybody else wants to chime in with their experience, we'd love to hear it. Well, I'm sort of taking a minute for folks to think about that. So it sounds to me like kind of the take-home message today for today's webinar is to be on the lookout for it, right? To be looking for these signs and symptoms that we have up on the screen, to report any potential sightings. There is a question in the chat box from Alice. Is it a concern? Is beech leaf disease a concern for spread to other species? So that's an interesting question. It being a nematode, like I know sometimes we talk about, these diseases being very, host specific or species specific. Is this one species specific, or is there concern about it impacting other species like maple or birch?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Lydialingus crenate is a leaf gall nematode, and the subspecies, the cani, are the ones that affect our beech trees. So this subspecies of nematode is an issue. This subspecies will not infect other host trees that are not beech.
Okay, so it's a subspecies that only impacts the beech, and I won't try to repronounce the name of that subspecies, Savannah. Sounds like a little bit of a tongue twister. There's a note from Roger here in the chat box that he's seen it in Holden and Leiden, Massachusetts. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But there is a link to a reporting site in Massachusetts. So Roger, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm not sure, Savannah, I can just sort of toggle here. Do you know the situation in Massachusetts, and off the top of your head, where folks can report down there for potential sightings?
I don't know the actual link to use, but every New England state at least has an invasives reporting site. So like New Hampshire's is NH bugs, but Massachusetts has had beech leaf disease for one of the longest times. If you look at the map progression again, in 2020 is the first detection near the Cape. And now in 2022, it was widespread throughout the state, only getting worse, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Well, I did put the link that Roger, I'm going to cross my fingers. I hope that's the right link. I just copied and pasted it. It looks like it goes to reporting form. So Roger, if you have any more information on what folks can do down in Massachusetts, feel free to unmute yourself and join us live here. Just sort of with that in mind, you mentioned, Savannah, pesticide, sort of treatment options. And I know that, those are, certainly things that are kind of in development and, recommendations that are kind of evolving, right, as we get our hands around this issue. I'm curious though, if can you share, like, are there any like biological controls? I know for like hemlock woolly adelgid, we did a walk together a few weeks back in Jamaica. We also VWA sponsored a walk for EAB up in the Plainfield Marshfield area, and those were sites where you guys, the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation, is using sort of or piloting, I could say, maybe some biological controls. Is there any talk or sort of exploration going on right now around potential biological controls? Or, I guess I'm just curious for sort of the status of that.
Yeah, so for other invasives like hemlock woolly adelgid and emerald ash borer, the state of Vermont's been able to use biocontrols. For beech leaf disease, right now we don't have any in the works. It usually takes APHIS and the Forest Service about a decade to tease those out. It was only first detected in Ohio in 2012, and that really picked up on everybody's radar until about 2018, 2019 is when the Forest Service started picking it up a little bit more. Going back to the pesticides I talked about today, neither of these two, so we have the phosphite, polyphosphite 30, and then the phylloperam, neither of these are allowed to be used in Vermont as a pesticide. I just want to set a reminder. Other states have different pesticide regulations, so I'd follow up with your state agency and see. But I think just trying to increase overall tree health and vigor, if you have a ornamental beech tree, this is a lot easier. So like watering it during periods of drought, giving it some mulch, trying not to hit it with your weed whacker, are just all ways to not stress out the tree a little bit more. Maybe it would be better apt to dealing with pests and stressors such as beech leaf disease. In our forested settings, we're not really sure. We can't even think about biocontrol agents yet because we don't even know how they spread or how we can control this on a much larger scale.
Interesting. Good points. Yeah, interesting. Andrew, just maybe to kind of wrap up here. So you are the protection forester, right, down in the Windham County area. I'm curious. We talked a little bit. We heard from Linda about sort of an infestation in Guilford. I'm curious, like, what are you seeing so far, recognizing it's only June 10th, right? So the growing season is really just getting started. But what are you seeing out in the field for, sort of new potential observations or, what are you hearing from landowners and foresters in the Windham County area?
Yeah, I've been getting people reach out to me in Windham and Windsor counties that have seen it. I feel like I might want to kick that to Savannah for exactly what's been confirmed, because she goes through with the Forest Service and they get that actually confirmed for the public. But honestly, really wherever I've looked, I've found it, to be honest.
So the reporting process then, so is it, is it the Forest Service that actually confirms, or do you send those away for, sort of by, for genetic confirmation, or what does that process of confirmation look like, Savannah?
Yeah, so right now, I can only make the towns public. So the 8 towns that we discussed earlier are the only towns that are public until we get any other federal confirmation. So say we had a detection in Windsor County, I would need to send those samples off to the Forest Service in order to get federal confirmation. And then once federal confirmation comes for the county, I'm then able to confirm the town level reports for Vermont in the lab without having to send stuff up. Just because this is, it's not necessarily a federally regulated pest, but we're working really closely with the Forest Service on it. So we just want to make sure that we have our DNA confirmation, especially if symptoms aren't really explicit and like textbook.
Yeah, sure. No, totally makes sense, and I appreciate the work that goes into that. I'm curious. So again, it looks like sort of based on the map, it looks like sort of there were some questions earlier on about is it one infestation that has spread, or are we seeing kind of multiple infestations? Do you have a sense of like the timeline of kind of how those pieces may come together? Like do you know? Like, do you think that by the end of the year you'll have some more data from the Forest Service that'll sort of be exploring that question, or?
I don't know if it's at the end of the year, but I know that there's a lot of work going on university, state, and federal levels to try to figure out the spread, try to figure out the severity of it, as well as trying to figure out all the other questions like what's the vectors? Can we actually make any other tree sick? Which right now it's no, but what's the control mechanisms? So a lot of research and money and time is getting poured into these. And it is one of these pests that I wish I had all the answers to share with you all. But this is just all we can share at this time because we just don't know. So getting these reports and being able to give presentations like this one, again, thanks for having us, just to educate the public so they're on the lookout and they can reach out to us, we can reach out to the Forest Service with what everybody's seeing on the ground level. And that really helps just keep turning the research.
Excellent. Well, that's great. And again, thank you guys so much for the presentation today. I just put a link in the chat box as well to VT invasives. As Savannah said, thank you to all the participants who have joined us today. You are the eyes and the ears, out in the field. And so we encourage folks, if you see something suspicious, or you think you see signs and symptoms, please go ahead and share that with one of these reporting tools, or Andrew and Savannah, and I'll follow up for the presentation today with contact information for those folks and links to these reporting sites. So thank you, Andrew and Savannah, so much for taking the time to join us today and talk to us about this really important issue. As I said in the beginning, it's sort of sad to see another pest like this, impacting our forests here in Vermont, but in really important work that you're doing and trying to understand and help landowners and land managers in making wise decisions around forest management, given this kind of evolving situation. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you, Savannah and Andrew, for your great presentation today. And just a reminder, so really, on behalf of Vermont Woodlands Association, we're thrilled to be able to offer these types of webinars. That's really what we are about as an organization. If you're interested in learning more about our work, you can find us online at vermontwoodlands.org. And also another shout out to the Windham, Region Woodland Owners Association. They're a great organization working primarily in the Windham County area that offer a whole bunch of different workshops and programs. And if anybody is with them and wants to put put their website in the chat box, I don't know it off the top of my head, but again, if you're in the Windham area, that's another fabulous nonprofit that is a great resource. So again, thank you everybody so much for joining us today and participating in this webinar. And we'll keep everybody apprised as we learn more and sort of see how beech leaf disease impacts our landscape here in Vermont.